But again, moms, we're glad that you're here. Hopefully you got a handout. If there were insufficient numbers of the handouts, you can go to the church's website, oakhilldrivechurchofchrist.com, and download a photo or a copy of the written word, or usually by Monday afternoon, Tuesday at the latest, this message will be posted on our website, and so you can view it and see it. In talking about moms, I wanted to use Luke chapter 8, verses 41 and 42, and then 49 and 50 as the text for what I'd like to share with you this morning. Then a man named Jairus, a leader of the local synagogue, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come home with him. His only daughter, who was about 12 years old, was dying. And while he was still speaking to her, a woman with an issue of blood, a messenger arrived from the home of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue, and he told him, "Your daughter is dead. There's no use troubling the teacher now." But when Jesus heard what had happened, he said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid. Just have faith, and she will be healed." I will tell you that when I first became a parent, no one ever told me that newborns make a lot of nighttime noises, like all night long. I mean, they gurgle, they pant, they whimper, they whine, they smack their lips, they sigh, they do all sorts of stuff. And they keep dads awake, not to mention moms. At least that's what my kids did. And early on, we kind of worked out a schedule. I wanted my wife to be able to get at least some block of time to sleep, and so we decided to do the newborn thing in shifts. So I was the first responder during the graveyard shift. And I didn't know what to make out of all those baby noises. When breathing slowed, I'd lean my ear to see if my little son was still breathing. And when Lisa's breath got hurried, I looked up infant hyperventilation, kind of in the family medical encyclopedia that we had. When William kind of burbled and panted, so did I. And after a couple hours of this, with the first child, and then with the second child, and then with the third child, I realized, I have no idea what I'm doing here. And that's when it hit me like this tsunami of sobriety. I'm in charge of a human being. And I don't care how tough you think you are. I don't care if maybe you're even a Navy SEAL who specializes in high-altitude parachute dives into enemy territory. You might spend each day making million-dollar split-second decisions in the stock market. It really doesn't matter, because every parent, I believe, melts the moment he or she feels the full force of parenthood. I know I did. I thought, how did I get myself into this? So I retraced my steps. First came love, then came marriage, then came discussions about the baby carriage. And, I certainly was open to the idea, especially when I considered my role in kind of launching the effort, right? But somehow, during that 9-month expansion project, the reality of fatherhood never dawned on me. And I think moms, to a certain extent, have maybe a slight advantage, because you've got 36 weeks of elbows inside your stomach reminding you that there's a baby there. But for a dad, the kick comes in the gut later. And this semi-truck of parenting comes loaded with all sorts of fears as parents, right? We fear that we might fail the child. We fear that we might even forget the child. Will we have enough money? Will we have enough answers? Will we have enough diapers? Do I have enough drawer space? And then comes the vaccinations and the educations and the homework and the homecoming. And even though we learn how to cope, this apiary of dangers just buzzes around us in the background like a beehive of bees. Like, for instance, the custody battle raging around a mother's 10-year-old son. The courts, the father, the mother, the lawyers, they're all pulling at this child like he was taffy. And she wonders if her child will even ever survive the ordeal. And so do the parents of a teenage daughter who collapsed on a volleyball court. No one knew that she had a heart condition. And now no one's not really sure what the rest of her life is going to look like. But at least they know where she is. Because then there's the other mother who doesn't know where her daughter is. Her daughter, a high school senior, ran away with her boyfriend. He's into drugs, she's into him, and they're both into trouble. The mother begs for help because no parent can sit still while his or her child suffers. And Jairus was no exception. See, on the other side of the lake, the crowds had welcomed Jesus because they had been waiting for Jesus to arrive in their community. And then came along a man, his name was Jairus. He was a leader of the local synagogue. And he came and he fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come home with him because his only daughter, who was only 12 years old, was dying. As Jesus went with him, he was surrounded by the crowds. Luke chapter 8, verses 40 through 42. Jairus was a Capernaum community leader. That's where he lived. It was in Capernaum, which is by the Galilean Sea. And he was, according to Mark chapter 5, verse 22, one of the rulers of the synagogue. So I want you to get in your mind's eye who this individual is. He's kind of like the mayor, the bishop, an ombudsman. He's kind of all that wrapped into one. It's the kind of man that a city would send to go out and meet a celebrity, like Jesus. But when Jairus approached Jesus on the Galilean shoreline, he wasn't representing the village. He was pleading on behalf of his child. His urgency in the matter had stripped away the formalities that he might have otherwise used in greeting a guest like Jesus. He issued no salutation, no compliment, just a prayer of panic. And Jairus, I'll have you know, isn't the only parent to run onto the gospel pages on behalf of a child. A mother stormed out of the Canaanite hills one day, crying, quote, "Mercy, Master, Son of David, my daughter is cruelly affected by an evil spirit." Matthew chapter 15, verse 22. Or take, for instance, a father. He's the dad of a seizure-tormented boy, and he had gone to the disciples for help. They failed to help him, and so now he's reaching out to Jesus, and he cries out with tears, "Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief." Mark chapter 9, verse 24. So you see, you have a Canaanite mother, you have the father of an epileptic boy, and now you have Jairus. And these three parents form this kind of unwitting New Testament society. It's the society of struggling parents of stricken children. But in each case, Jesus responds. He never turns one away, and his consistent kindness issues a very welcome announcement. Jesus heeds the concerns of a parent's heart. Because after all, our kids were his kids first, weren't they? The psalmist says in Psalm 127, verse 3, "Don't you see that children are God's best gift? The fruit of the womb, his generous legacy?" And from that, we understand and we know that before they were ours, they were his. And even as they are ours, they're still his. And we tend to forget that fact because we regard our children, as though we have some final say in their health or their welfare. But we don't. All people are God's people, including the small people that sit around our table. And Jairus now is hoping for a miracle. He begs Jesus to come into his home, Luke chapter 8, verse 41. You see, this particular father wasn't content with some long-distance assistance from Jesus, the miracle worker. He wants Jesus to be under his roof. He wants Jesus to walk through his hallways. He wants Jesus to walk into the bedroom of his dying daughter and kneel down beside her and fix her. He wants the presence of Christ to permeate his entire house. And he is a stubborn intercessor, taking his parenting fears to Jesus, the person that he thinks can help him in this situation. And yet Jesus, when you think about it, throughout the Scripture says very little about parenting. I mean, he doesn't make any comments about spanking or breastfeeding or sibling rivalry or even schooling. Yet Jesus' actions speak volumes about prayer and children, because each time a parent prays, Christ responds. His big message to moms and dads like us: bring your children to me. We can't protect children from every possible threat in life, but you know what, church? We can take them to the source of life. Even then, our appeals are sometimes followed by a difficult choice. Because as Jairus and Jesus are going to Jairus' home to tend to this sick daughter, a messenger arrived from the home of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue. He told him, "Your daughter is dead. There's no use troubling the teacher now." But when Jesus heard what had happened, he said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just have faith, and she will be healed." Again, Luke chapter 8, verses 49 and 50. Do you see that contrast? Here's this parent, this dad in this case, being whipsawed by two totally contrasting messages. The first from his servants is, "Your daughter is dead." The second from Jesus, "Don't be afraid." So horror is calling from one side and hope is calling from the other. First it's tragedy, and then it's trust. Jairus heard two voices and had to choose which one he was going to heed. And the truth is, church, don't we all? The hard reality of parenting reads something like this: you can do your absolute dead level best and still stand where Jairus stood. You can protect, you can pray, you can keep all the boogeymen at bay, and still find yourself in the ER at midnight and a drug rehab clinic on a visitor's Sunday. Choosing between those two voices, choosing between despair and belief. And Jairus, quite honestly, could have chosen despair, right? I mean, who would have faulted him for just deciding, enough is enough. I've prayed enough. I've talked to my wife enough. I've talked to friends enough. I've begged enough. I've pleaded enough. You know what? I'm just done. He had no guarantee that Jesus could even help him. His daughter was dead. And Jairus could have simply, as a parent, walked away. And his parents were so glad that he didn't. Because we need to know what Jesus will do when we entrust our kids to him. Luke chapter 8, verse 51. When Jesus went to the house, he let only Peter, John, James, and the girl's father and mother go inside. Did you see that? All the actors at this point in time is Jairus and Jesus, and then we're introduced to Jesus bringing in Peter and John and James. Who else did he invite? He invited Mom. Now, in this story, we don't know where the mom was, but what we see Jesus doing is uniting the household. Because until this point in time, the mother had been, for whatever reason, kind of out of the picture. And maybe she was at her daughter's side, or maybe she was at odds with her husband, because crises like this can sometimes divide the best of parents. The stress of caring for a sick child or a troubled child can drive a wedge between mom and dad, but Christ united them. He wanted mom and dad to stand together in the struggle. Jesus gathered the entire, albeit small, household in the presence of the daughter, and there Jesus banished unbelief. Verses 52 and 54 of Luke chapter 8. He said, "Do not weep. She is not dead, but sleeping." And they ridiculed him, knowing that she was dead, but he put them all outside. He commanded doubt to depart and permitted only faith and hope to remain. You see, God has a heart for hurting parents. And should we be surprised? I mean, after all, God himself is a father, isn't he? What parental emotion hasn't God felt? Are you separated from your child? So is God. Is someone mistreating your child? Well, they mocked and bullied his. Is someone taking advantage of your children? The Son of God was set up by false testimony and betrayed by a greedy follower. Are you forced to watch your child as he or she suffers? God watched his Son on the cross. Do you find yourself wanting to spare your child from all the hurt in the world? God did too. But because of his great love, in Romans chapter 8, verse 32, it says, he did not spare his own Son, but gave him for us all. So with Jesus, God will surely give us all things. All things, I believe, includes courage and hope as parents. But some of you, quite honestly, might find this story about Jairus a little difficult. I mean, maybe you've prayed the same prayer that he did, and yet you found yourself at a cemetery facing every parent's darkest night. I mean, what hope does the story of Jairus offer to you? I mean, honestly, in this particular story, Jesus resurrected Jairus' child. Why didn't he save yours too? Well, it's not that God doesn't understand. He does. Because if you recall, God buried his child too. But he hates death more than you do. That's why he killed it. In 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 10, it says, he abolished death and brought life and immortality to light. You see, for those who trust God, death is nothing more than a transition to heaven. Your child may not be in your arms, but your child is safely in his. Now, others of you may be standing for a long time where Jairus stood. I mean, you've long since left the water's edge in connection with your offers and your prayers, but you haven't yet arrived at the household of this answered prayer that Jairus did. I mean, maybe you've wept a monsoon of tears for your child, and at times you felt that maybe a breakthrough was nearing, that Christ was following you to your house, but now you're not so sure anymore. You find yourself alone on the path, wondering if Christ has forgotten you and your child. He hasn't. He never dismisses a parent's prayer. Giving your child to God in the right time and the right way, God will give your child back to you. So moms, happy Mother's Day. What greater gift could you give your family than to continue to pray for them? And kids celebrating a mom, what better gift could you give your mother than praying for her grandchildren or praying for mom? And as Lynn mentioned this morning, praying for this church, praying for the group of people who worship here, praying that God will bring others to this place to worship with us. Moms, you're very special. And you wouldn't be a mom without a child. And parenting children is not easy. But praying for them is something that you can do. It's something that we all can do. We can pray for our own children, for the children of others that we know. We can pray for grandchildren. We can pray for all of them. Because prayer changes things. And Jesus listens to a parent's prayer about a child, and Jesus responds. He responded for Jairus. He responded to that Canaanite woman. He responded to the man who had the epileptic son. And did you hear that father's prayer? I believe, Jesus, just help me in my unbelief. I mean, I want to know that you can take care of this, but I'm not really sure. So help me in my unbelief because I really do want to believe. Doesn't that kind of describe some of us? I know it does me. Wondering if Jesus really hears, if Jesus really cares, if Jesus is really involved. Well, he is. Because he's a parent too. And he loves his children. Every single one of them. So we're going to sing this song. And if there are any prayer requests that you want to pass up at the conclusion, of this song, then we'll give those, but you can pass them up as we sing. This Little Light of Mine. When's the last time you sang that song? Another kid's song, right? I mean, we're singing about kids or for kids, but we're just kids ourselves who worship a living God who loves us unconditionally. So let's stand and sing This Little Light of Mine.